Number 24. What is a disadvantage of operating a floating exchange rate system? What is a floating exchange rate system? Well, first of all, what is an exchange rate? So an exchange rate is the value of the currency in terms. Well, first of all, what is an exchange rate? An exchange rate is the price of a currency in terms of another currency. And what is a floating exchange rate system? Well, the exchange rate can be presented on a foreign exchange market, which is basically a demand and supply diagram that shows the exchange rate. So we have our demand curve and our supply curve, and let's choose two currencies. Let's take the Burmese jet and the American dollar, for example, right? So this will be the foreign exchange market for jets. So on the y-axis, we have dollars per jet, also known as the price of jet in dollars. The way that you can remember this is that since this foreign exchange rate is in the focus of jets, that means that we want to know what the value of the jet is. So we want to know the value of the jet in US dollars. So how much, if we had one jet, how much is one jet in US dollars, right? You want to know its value in terms of US dollars. So if you reword that, you can either rewrite it as the number of dollars per jet or the price of jet in dollars, because we want to know what the value of the jet is, because this is the foreign exchange rate for jets. And now down here, since it's the foreign exchange rate for jets, we will be looking at the quantity of jets. Right, so now we have our equilibrium point as well. So a floating exchange rate system is basically an exchange rate system where the price or the value of the exchange rate is determined by the forces of the forces of its foreign exchange markets, or the forces of its demand and supply. There is another exchange rate system called the fixed exchange rate system, which is a system that is controlled, the exchange rate system that is controlled by the government instead, which can still be viewed on this demand and supply diagram. However, it will be the government using its foreign exchange reserves to influence the market by either selling it in the market to increase its demand or to increase its supply, or it could just manipulate it to get it the price that it wants. The main difference between these two systems is that since the one that is fixed is of course fixed, it doesn't fluctuate as much because the government is controlling it, trying to keep it stable or the same at least. However, floating is unpredictable because it's not controlled by policies at all. It is basically running as chaotically and freely as it wants to. So it's unpredictable because, for example, let's say that we have more tourists coming into Myanmar, where the currency they use is jets. And that means that they will convert their foreign currency into jets. That means that it'll look like the demand for jets is increasing because you're buying more of it. You're converting more of your foreign money into jets. And also at the same time, so if this happened, then the value of jets will appreciate or increase because this is where the new equilibrium point will be. However, if it were a fixed exchange rate, and let's say the government doesn't want the exchange rate, the value to increase a lot or fluctuate a lot. So if that had happened, they would have used their foreign exchange reserves by using their foreign money to maybe buy more of their own currency on the foreign exchange market, which will decrease its demand for its currency. And of course, so that means it will decrease from this demand curve, right? So it might decrease back to its original position or around it so that it will have a stable, at least not fluctuating as much value on its jet. So that's the difference between the two systems. So one key takeaway for a possible disadvantage of a floating exchange rate is that it is very unstable and unpredictable because it's fluctuating all the time and you're not controlling it. So let's go through each of the options and see if there are any more disadvantages that might come into play. Now the first one says, it makes it difficult to prioritize domestic economy policy gains. Now, this doesn't really seem to relate with the floating exchange rate because it's talking about economic policy aims. Well, for the floating exchange rate, you just kind of let it run free with no policies at all, just like the free market economy, where there is no government intervention. So this doesn't relate. But what I think is that if this is more related to the fixed exchange rate system. So if you did have a fixed exchange rate system, since you have to focus on keeping it non-fluctuating or stable by having foreign exchange reserves and then manipulating them to buying and selling them to manipulate the foreign exchange market, you might not be able to focus on other economic policy aims. So this seems like a disadvantage for the fixed exchange rate, because if you were focusing on maintaining this, it does make it difficult to prioritize domestic economic policy aims or other policies in general. But since we are looking at a floating exchange rate and it's not related, we're going to cross that off and look at the next option. Next one says, it makes the prices of internationally traded goods less predictable. Now that's true, because the price of internationally traded goods, or you can say in a more simpler sense, your imports, because that is what you get from other countries. The imports are the goods and services from foreign countries that come into your country. So the prices of imports then will be less predictable. That's true, because if you have a floating exchange rate system, the value of your currency will be uncertain. It will be fluctuating all the time. You wouldn't know which one it is. Or it will be unpredictable. It might be $5 for one jet today, but 10 for tomorrow. So you can't make a clear prediction or be certain because it will be fluctuating. So yes, it makes it less predictable because it's chaotic. Yes, I'm just repeating myself now. So this seems like a potential answer. So we're just going to keep that in mind and look at the next option. The next one says that it means that the government must keep significant foreign currency reserves. Yeah, well, like I said, the floating exchange rate is based on the foreign exchange market, otherwise known as the forces of demand and supply of the foreign exchange market. So there is no government intervention or government policies involved. This must be, I think, referring to the fixed exchange rate system again. So when it says it means that the government must keep significant foreign exchange currency reserves, yes, in a fixed exchange rate, you would need that because you are mainly using foreign currency reserves. You are using those to buy and sell the currencies in the foreign exchange market to influence or manipulate the price or the value of your currency. Now that applies to the fixed exchange rate, not the floating exchange rate. So we're going to cross that off. That can't be it. The last option says it requires continuous government intervention in currency markets. Well, yeah, like I said, floating exchange rate system depends on forces of demand and supply or the exchange rate market. So no government intervention. The fixed one has it. So no, that's wrong. Let's cross that off. So it seems like all the other options are talking about the fixed exchange rate, not the floating one. So our only option that applies to the floating exchange rate system is option B, and that is correct.